This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's March 24th, 2026. On this day in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court decided one of Tennessee's election laws was unconstitutional. The court overturned a rule that said people had to be a legal resident of the state for a year before registering to vote. And since many other states had similar laws, that ruling had the effect of changing the voting laws in much of the nation. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Dunn v. Blumstein centered on a young Vanderbilt law professor, James Blumstein, who moved to Nashville in June of an election year. He attempted to sign up as a voter before the registration deadline for the August primaries, and he was turned away because he hadn't lived here long enough. Attorneys for the state argued that residency laws were vital for protecting against voter fraud. They also made the case that the only way to be sure people voting in Tennessee elections were truly invested in looking out for the state's and the community's interests was to make sure they'd been a part of the community here for a little while. Blumstein, who represented himself, countered that the state was scared of political diversity and what kind of opinions people would bring with them when they moved into the state. The court ruled in favor of Blumstein. According to a Vanderbilt Law article published on the 50th anniversary of the ruling, Blumstein also came up with an influential idea during his attempt to vote. He filled out a ballot, sealed it in an envelope, and gave it to the election officials in hopes that his vote could be counted if and when he was declared eligible to vote. These days, we call that a provisional ballot. And since 2002, federal law has required that polling places accept provisional ballots from people who aren't immediately cleared to vote for some reason. Right now, the details of yet another kind of voting are being considered in two federal court cases, both of which have the potential to affect how elections work in Tennessee. One, out of Mississippi, was presented to the Supreme Court yesterday. The Republican Party is asking justices to decide that mail-in ballots are only valid if they reach officials by Election Day. The other case deals with a Pennsylvania law that requires voters to sign and date the outside of the envelope when they send in a mail-in ballot. Tennessee is one of 20 states asking the nation's high court to weigh in on that one. And Tennessee doesn't allow just anyone to cast a mail-in or absentee ballot. They're only for people 60 or older, or for folks who can show that they aren't able to vote in person due to a disability, a religious requirement on Election Day, or because they'll either be working in a certain kind of job or temporarily living somewhere else. And honestly, while I'm trying to say this stuff in an easy-to-digest way, there's another layer of detail about things like what kind of work could qualify you for an absentee ballot. But generally speaking, it's an important tool for folks like students going to an out-of-state college or people who live in nursing homes. It's also the way that people working for the government in foreign service or members of the military and their families can vote when they're stationed somewhere else. And this issue of picking which date matters is a really big deal for folks who live overseas. When you put a letter in the mail, you have an idea of how long delivery will take, but you can't be certain. The farther the distance, the more opportunity there is for delay. Almost 4 million service members, including hundreds of Tennessee National Guard members, are stationed overseas. The requirement that absentee ballots be in the hands of election officials by Election Day is not always possible. What they can control is when they fill out their ballot and drop it in the mail. So that's the postmark date, or a date written on the ballot envelope. But at the same time, there's concern that the Pennsylvania rules about dating and signing envelopes overcomplicate the process and just end up giving the state an extra reason to reject some people's votes. Just like it was back in the early 70s, the arguments in these court battles are about finding the balance between making sure people can't game the system and making sure the system can't suppress votes that officials consider inconvenient. In just a few minutes, a conversation with a Metro Schools teacher who also performs in drag. That's coming up after the newscast.
Here at Nashville Public Radio, we believe that quality news and information is a right, not a privilege. We believe everyone in our community deserves the same access to high-quality information, to investigative journalism, to civic dialogue, no matter who they are or how much money they have. But that type of equitable access cannot exist unless the people who can afford it pitch in to cover their neighbors who can't. Do your part today at WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Tennessee farmers are taking a hit amid the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. Iran is one of the largest exporters of fertilizer, but has closed key Persian Gulf shipping lanes. Numerous popular fertilizers are on waylaid ships, driving up costs just as American farmers want supplies for spring. Agriculture is key in Tennessee's economy, with soybeans, tomatoes, and snap beans among the top commodities. As Tennessee faces a tight budget year, the legislature will soon discuss a proposal to give a new way to pay for fixing the state's infrastructure. Senator Heidi Campbell and Representative Afton Bain, both Democrats, have introduced legislation to legalize marijuana and use the tax revenue for road maintenance. The Pot for Potholes measure faces an uphill battle in the state's Republican supermajority, which voted last year to tighten restrictions on hemp and THC products. Bain says that she and Campbell are both on the Transportation Committee.
We have this, massive $1 billion backlog, $53 billion backlog. There's not enough, we're not generating enough revenue to address that backlog.
The bill will be heard in committee this week. To prepare, Bain and Campbell have launched potforpotholes.com, where Tennesseans from across the state have signed in support of the measure. Meanwhile, two other proposals would put the question of legalization to Tennessee voters. One would ask whether they approve of medical cannabis. The other would ask three distinct questions about medical and recreational marijuana. Neither would be binding, but could inform future legislation. A Tennessee bill that would limit the ability of local governments to manage where developers build has stalled in state committees. The proposed legislation would have allowed property owners to sue governments for enacting land use regulations like zoning laws. Zoning is a tool for communities to manage growth, prepare for extreme weather, and protect natural resources. The bill was originally sponsored by Representative Tim Hicks, a housing developer from East Tennessee, and was also co-sponsored by Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally. Hicks voluntarily withdrew the bill yesterday, saying it needs some more work. Nuclear technology company BWXT received rezoning approval from the Washington County Commission yesterday evening. The company has plans to expand its existing facility in Jonesboro, Tennessee's oldest town, to process depleted uranium for the federal government. For the Appalachian Mid-South Newsroom, Pierce Gentry reports.
After months of debate and repeatedly postponed meetings, the Washington County Commission voted 10-5 in favor of rezoning a portion of BWXT's land for the construction of a facility capable of refining depleted uranium for the federal government. That's despite a packed courthouse filled with locals who say they're against the project, citing fears the uranium metal refined by the new facility could contaminate their air and water.
I was actually pretty surprised.
That's Jonesboro resident Gabriel Wilson. He had been campaigning against BWXT's project for months. He says he's devastated by the vote, but understands the commission's decision.
There's a lot of pressure on our commission from state government, from federal government. Our country right now is in a semi-hot war in the Middle East, and I think that all of that plays into the atmosphere around a decision like this that can't be ignored.
BWXT has been given a contract worth $1.6 billion by the federal government to produce the material President Donald Trump wants to use to modernize the country's aging stockpile of nuclear weapons. Now that it has received state and local approval, their plans will be reviewed by federal regulators. In Jonesboro, I'm Pierce Gentry, WUOT News.
Taste-making record label Anti-Records signed Nashville musician Brennan Wadle today. The story of the signing comes back to this very radio station. Music and culture reporter Justin Barney has more.
The story of this signing goes back to an interview that I did with Anti-Records artist Waxahachie, where I asked her, what's a song you've been listening to recently? And she responded,
I've been obsessed with the Brennan Wadle singles that have been coming out. I do not know Brennan, but I'm a fan.
But that changed. She heard the interview and then reached out to Waxahachie. The two became friends, they toured together, and eventually Anti sent Wadle an offer, which she received while in line at Walmart.
I was like, okay, that sounds amazing.
To go with the signing today, Wadle and Waxahachie released a cover of Kathleen Edwards' song 6 O'Clock News.
And Again, that report came from music and culture reporter Justin Barney. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. During this Fund Drive week, we're sharing recent profile interviews from This Is Nashville. And this one comes from an episode with the online title, Ben Slinkard is Kennedy Ann Scott, and vice versa.
What was growing up like?
Growing up, that's a difficult question because I always say my parents are good people. They just didn't always know how best to help and support me. And so it was rough growing up outside of the home, going to school, being bullied relentlessly for just merely being myself, talking, walking, all those basic things. It was not fun growing up in a small town and constantly being ridiculed for being different.
Yeah. But what was being different in your growing up? Like, what were they picking on?
Most of the time, it was how I talked. I talked very high pitch, or I had that little baby, lovely little gay lisp.
Well, where did that come from? Were you like, this is just me?
Yeah.
I'm not. You don't even know.
Me.
What did you think at the time? Like, did you understand what that might mean, or what that? Where was your head?
Well, I knew that I liked boys at a very early age, 5. Like, I knew I liked boys. Yeah. I liked them, not just as friends. Like, I was like, well, that boy's really cute. And I was like, am I supposed to feel like that? Because, from the moment we're born, we put children into boxes. Pink for girls, blue for boys. I mean, we do this. And so, what's right, what's wrong? I would always go into my kindergarten classroom, and there was this yellow dress with daisies on it, and it was my favorite thing in the world to put on. I always wanted to be the mom. I always wanted to help people. And then, I would race the girls to the dress-up trunk and be like, nope, I'm the mom. You all are the sisters. Because I guess I just wanted to be in charge, so maybe I was bossy. But there was just something about it, me being me. And then
that's going to get you picked on in elementary school.
It is, because we constantly put children in these boxes.
Yeah.
And so anything that is outside the norm is automatically ridiculed and told, whoa, put that away. And I hate when people or when parents are like, oh, you can be whatever you want to be. Mm-hmm. And when children start to show you who they want to be, we say, no, that's not what we meant. And it happens all the time. And I see parents do it to their kids all the time. And I think they subconsciously do it, but they do it.
You're saying even parents who think of themselves as very open-minded, and then suddenly kid shows themselves and they're like, are you sure that's you?
Yeah. And the way that we just talk about kids, like I have cousins who will be like, oh, he's going to be a little heartbreaker. Why are we already putting that on him?
Wow.
Let's not what? Let's not say that.
Yeah.
It's just interesting what we subconsciously do without even noticing it.
Yeah. Would you mind telling us about your grandmother?
Yeah. She was my favorite person in the whole world.
Yeah.
I think she still is my favorite person because, she's been gone now for quite a while.
Is this right that she died right before you left town for college?
Yes. The Sunday before I moved into my college dorm of my freshman year. She passed away on a Sunday, and I moved into college on a Friday morning.
So why did she it seems like she just got you.
She did.
What did she see that even your parents really struggled to see?
I think she saw me because, in high school and middle school and all that, I would play hooky from school sometimes just because I just couldn't go to school. It was supposed to be I loved going to school. It was my favorite thing because I loved to learn. And that was the one thing in my life that I could control, was what knowledge I put into my brain. Everyone could tell me everything about myself, but the one thing that they could not control was how much information I took in and held in my brain. And when I would play hooky from school, and I'd go to my grandmother's just to hang out. I was supposed to be sick, but she would teach me how to cook. She would teach me how to sew. And she never said, oh, boys don't do that. Or she never said, oh, go play with your cousins, go play with the boys, go hang out in the living room. She just showed me how to cook. She just showed me how to sew. We did arts and crafts. We would draw and doodle and do all of these things. And she would just sit there with me, and we would just visit, and then we would just talk for hours.
You can find the rest of that conversation in the This Is Nashville podcast feed. Thanks for listening to the Nash Villager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend, or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.